prazer estar aqui. I'm going to switch to English. So it's a pleasure to have a thinker in this stage. We normally find a person that can give you, there's a Greek word called phronesis. It is the empirical knowledge, how to actually transfer the knowledge to the field. And he's an author of a book called...
But that person wasn't available, so I'm here. Just kidding.
He's an author of the book called The Human Element. It's his first very book, and it is a piece of art. I recommend to all of you to have the book. So let's start. We had a chat on the phone, and Dave, you told me like 3 main topics that kind of is the main challenge for an organization to thrive in transformational period. Could you let's contextualize your thesis, your book, under these 3 main topics that could stop companies? You are in front of probably 60 to 70% of the GDP of the retail in Brazil here, so they can really move the needle of the country. And if few of them move that needle, we change a region, and that's the outcome that we'd like to have. So please, contextualize your thesis.
Well, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be in person with all of you. Thanks for making the trip in. The thesis of the book, The Human Element, is built on this premise that the general wisdom or approach of most marketers and innovators is to emphasize the newness of their idea. We spend a lot of time promoting our new ideas, designing our new ideas, advertising our new ideas. And in this book, we say that that's a great thing to do. Obviously, raising awareness for a new idea is important, but that's only half of the equation. The other half of the equation is the resistance that any new idea will face in the market. And in this book, we've highlighted 4 what we call frictions that stand in the way of any new idea. The first friction is the friction of inertia. No matter how much people know that the status quo is not ideal, there is an overwhelming desire to stick with the familiar, even though the familiar may be imperfect, so the friction of inertia. The friction of effort, how much physical and mental exertion is required for somebody to implement or execute that change. The third is the friction of emotion, the undesired feelings we cause in others. Anytime somebody's going to do something new, there's always anxiety, there's always trepidation, and unless we can manage that, they will never accept our idea. And the fourth is something we refer to as reactance, which I think we see a lot in the world today, particularly in the United States. People's aversion to being changed. If somebody feels like they are being sold to, it doesn't matter how good the idea is, people will typically resist the new idea with equal force to the force they feel like it's being imposed. And so in this book, we talk about the importance of spotting these frictions and managing them in order to achieve successful outcomes.
This third item that he mentioned, the resistance. If you do not empower the idea, you normally go not to embrace that idea. It is, I don't know, anthropology would explain that, but it is a factor that's the human element behind your companies. So how can you create a VP level or director level or a second management high level to embrace others' idea? One retailer was facing a brutal challenge of bringing the omnichannel to a reality. And he asked me what to do, and I say, look, simple. Some countries, these retailers not particularly from Brazil, and you need to respect cultural, how to communicate. And I told them, in your culture, goals means a lot. Goals communicate. So simple. Put to the online business the goals of increasing the physical store's revenue, and put to the physical store general manager the 100% of the goal to increase the online business. Simple. And then the guy said, oh, but I might destroy my ability of generating the revenue. And then I told him, say, if you are not able to live with the destruction of your own business, you are not ready to transform yourself. And that's the kind of, if you do not own your own idea, forget about, embrace the failure. That's something that I stand in VTEX, our company, and something that I do during my classes in Acon. So I told the Acon we did it with Eduardo here, the Acon in Brazil, and I spoke a lot about that. Do not embrace success. Success is predictable. Embrace the failure. And not embracing the failure on a very romantic pitch, but embrace by doing it and by paying for that. So that's my view on that. On the page, I'm going to bring...
By the way, just to build off of this, when we teach entrepreneurship, so I'm a professor at the Kellogg School of Management, when we teach entrepreneurship and innovation, our job is not to teach students how to flawlessly execute innovation, because that's an impossible task. We view our job as to teach them how to get comfortable with failing inexpensively and quickly, because the more they do, the more learning they will... Like, it's the scientific method is effectively what we teach. In science, failures are data. And unless we view failures as data and things to learn with, we'll never do anything revolutionary.
And fail means also to deal with your reputation, right? Because if you're not open to destroy your reputation and say, oh my God, I worked 20 years to come here. If you're not open to destroy your reputation, you're not open to transform yourself. So I'm going to bring one practical example of that. Inside organizations, to control budget and headcounts, it is the more kind of easy way to find power. If you control 50% of the budget of your organization and 70% of the headcount of your organization, you are the one. But if you look for your organizations right now, the best things that happened in the last 5 years were probably where budget was not there and not so much headcount. So how to transform, and then I would like to bring this book to the table and say, how to overcome the status quo of the reputational career of the executives that they will pursue headcounts and budget as the kind of the representation of their reputation. So how we can change these, David? There's not like an easy answer to that, but you quote something quite interesting in your book in the page 127, the overcoming emotion.
Yeah.
Talk about this, please.
So the story we open this chapter with goes back to the early 1930s, 1940s, and it comes from General Mills. So General Mills, the CPG company that makes a lot of consumer products. One of the products that they invented in the 1930s was instant cake mix. So cake mix, where all you needed to do was add water and stir and put it in the oven, and you could have a wonderful, perfectly made cake. And they viewed this as a runaway hit. It was going to be fantastic. All home bakers needed to do was buy the cake mix, add water, and it would produce a wonderful cake. And in fact, in taste tests, it performed as well, if not better, than cake mixes or cakes that people made at home. But it wasn't an overnight success. Despite all of the user tests and despite all of the positive feedback they received on the product, people weren't buying it. And General Mills was puzzled. Why aren't people buying the thing that they said they wanted? Why weren't they buying the thing that in focus groups or in market research they said they would buy? And to make a long story short, in order to uncover the answer, they hired a guy named Ernst Dichter. And Ernst Dichter was a Viennese psychologist trained in the school of Sigmund Freud to understand the psychology of what was stopping home bakers from saying yes to this product that they said they wanted. And what Ernst Dichter realized is in their effort to reduce, or in their attempt to reduce effort, right, to make the job of baking a cake easier, they added emotional friction. They caused consternation and anxiety in their customers. What possible anxiety could they cause? Well, they made it too easy. They made it too easy. One of the things, if you think about what you hire a cake to do, a cake is like the ultimate greeting card. It's like the ultimate embodiment of sentiment. And it takes love and care to make. And when you give it to somebody, they're very excited that you spent the time and energy to actually make that cake for them. By making it too easy, these home bakers actually didn't feel like they were baking at all, which detracted some of that emotional value and caused them to say, you know what, maybe I'm not going to do this because it's too easy. So what was the solution? For a variety of reasons, some which are deeply, deeply Freudian, Ernst Dichter suggested that adding a little bit of friction back into the process could solve the problem. And what he recommended was adding 2 fresh eggs, which is why today in your cake mixes, you still add fresh eggs as part of the process. And by cracking and mixing in 2 fresh eggs, now all of a sudden there was enough effort involved to make it feel like it was my own. And as a result, the sales of cakes went through the roof. So sometimes when we make things too easy, we inadvertently erode the emotional value for which people are hiring a product in the first place.
Yeah, and translate this to your daily basis activities. When you have a bright idea, the same effort that you need to do by documenting your idea, you need to do to how you're going to transfer the ownership of this idea to the others. And that creates authority, and at the end, that creates alignment. So the power today for the executives and the business owners that are here today, the power today is not in budget anymore. That's what I call the budgeting karma. You define a budget, and by defining that budget, you committed to your success. Because you promise to the board, you promise to the stakeholders that that budget will be executed. But if in the middle you find a way of executing this in like 1/10 of the value, your mind will think, oh, I'm a failure. But actually, this is the best thing for the company. So who from the audience here already listened to this case that you want to implement something and you do the RFP to select providers based on the size of your budget? And that's a misconcept of efficiency. So budget and headcounts should be destroyed as an element of power. And I don't know exactly how to do it, but I am trying a lot with several clients, with several theses. One of them, it is what we mentioned before, and we were in a chat with Dave, is queue your darlings, right? If you are not able to queue your darlings, the ones that are there, how to fire? Yesterday in the dinner, we asked people, ask your board members, how many of them can do a query? How many of them actually produce TikTok? Are those guys the ones to lead your retail? Cut your darlings. So, okay, let's move to the other one.
And on that optimistic note.
No, sometimes people think like, oh, Mariano is too rough, right?
No, but it's provocative in the right way. In fact, when it comes to innovation, one of the biggest things that stands in the way of corporate innovation is the core business. Like, innovation is on everybody's mind, and there's always money for innovation right until the moment where the core business runs into trouble, and then all of that attention goes back to the core business, and companies wonder why they're never actually able to achieve something revolutionary instead of evolutionary, and it's because the moment that the core business runs into a little bit of challenge, all of those resources and all of that talent get absorbed back in. In order to do innovation properly, it really needs to be a full-time job. It needs to be a full-time job. It can't be a corporate hobby. It needs to be part of your core competence.
One provocation here, some like chairmen and CEOs, when they miss the CDO, the Chief Digital Officer, they call us, right? Say, oh, who should I hire? And it's pretty weird to have a CEO trying to hire a CDO. I would like to invite you to think, if a CEO needs to hire a CDO, it's because he's not the man or the woman to be in the CEO position. This is tough. So you need to reinvent yourselves. And I'm very glad to see here people that are 30 years in the road, some of you billions, millions in the bank. And what in the hell you are in the middle of a pandemic coming for a cold weather to listen for two young guys talking about like challenges that we're going to be in the next 20 years. So I'm very happy to see people here willing to survive. So survival.
You risked your lives to come here and listen to us.
Okay. Your book addresses what you call the frictions. What are the concept of frictions? What is the concept of frictions, and how to bypass frictions?
Yeah, so we teed this up at the beginning. So there's inertia, the desire to stick with the status quo, effort, the amount of physical exertion, and frankly, the amount of ambiguity required for somebody to address in order to adopt change, emotion, which we talked about, and reactance. One of the things that I'll point out is, particularly when it comes to retail, our instincts is if somebody's not buying our product, something is wrong with the product. Or we're not explaining it properly. So I need to advertise it differently. I need to talk about it differently. I need to price it differently. And we tend to think about the thing, the product or their strategy is the thing that needs to change. And we rarely consider that it's not a problem with the offer, it's not a problem with the price. It's something going on with the human beings that we're trying to serve. There is something going on in their brains and their minds that prevent them from saying yes. And so all of these theories are not necessarily how to make your idea better, it's how to reduce all of those headwinds that stand in the way. And usually, and this is kind of interesting, usually it's really small stuff. An example comes from a company based in Chicago that makes custom furniture. They make custom furniture for like 75% less than a typical custom furniture piece would cost. It is geared at Gen Z and millennials. People love it. They wind up visiting the site hundreds of thousands of times a day. They go into the retail environments and spend hours in the store designing the perfect custom sofa. They customize the fabric and they customize the handles. They customize the hardware. So they spend a lot of time building these things. They put them in their cart in the online experience. And then something really interesting happens, which is nothing, right? They abandon their cart. Are you all familiar with the abandoned cart problem? Clearly, there's enough magnetism to bring your customers to the site in the first place. There's enough interest in your ideas to get them to fill their cart with these ideas, which in effect is them prototyping ownership of the idea. But what stops them from pulling the trigger? What stops them from saying yes? Our instinct is that they don't understand the value or we haven't advertised it properly. In this particular case with this company, it turns out that the thing that was stopping people from buying these sofas that they clearly desired was, what were they going to do with their existing sofa? Were they going to have to haul it out of their apartment themselves? Were they going to have to hire movers? Would they be able to leave it in the alley with a garbage truck come pick it up? How am I going to do that? How much effort is it going to take? And what we learned through the research was, until they figured out what they were going to do with their existing sofa, nobody allowed themselves to say yes to buying the new one. So obviously, if you're this company, the solution is sort of obvious, right? The solution is remove the existing sofa at the time you drop off the current sofa. But up until that point, what had this company done? They'd spend millions on advertising and pricing strategies, effectively solving the wrong problem. So what we try to address in this book is oftentimes the things that's stopping people from saying yes have nothing to do with your offer. It has everything to do with minimizing the effort or the friction that stands in their way.
Yeah, that's. I would try to reinforce David's statement on this. You should dedicate as a leader to the level of conversation you have with your team at least 50% of your time. And nowadays CEOs are being dragged to doing a lot of meetings and to make decisions. And sometimes you dedicate like 5% of your time to have a kind of integrity with the conversations that you have. Integrity means that the other ones will be in the same page as you. So I have a quotation that I use a lot inside my company. That's two people with the same intellectual capability will always agree if we do respect two rules. Always talk with the same context and always talk under the same timeline. If you bring the conversation to the same timeline and to the same context, two people with the same intellectual capability will always agree. So it's not how to convince the other, it's how to bring the other to the same context and to the same timeline. And you're gonna exercise this and you're going to see that, oh my God, It's not that what I was mentioned, because successful conversation is when the other one understand what you want to say. Not when you say, I said that, I told that, I wrote that. That means nothing. It's all about the other. If the other can understand properly what you told, then you have a company.
And this is the reason we call the book The Human Element, is it's the human beings that are the solution to the problem, not the product or service. You said something about context, which is really important too. How many of you use focus groups as a market research methodology? A bunch of you. There's a really interesting, you said the word context, which calls this to mind. There's something really interesting about market research as we typically practice it, which is having people attempt to predict the future, which is really hard for them to do. Like, Mariano, if I said, today's, Wednesday, what are you going to have for dinner next Wednesday night? What would you say? Give me a guess.
Salad and,
and?
A beef.
Salad and beef. And he's going to say that because usually sometime in the middle of the week, Mariano and his family have salad and beef. And like, it's a really accurate answer. He's giving me his best guess of what's going to happen next week. But what's going to happen between this week and next week is somebody's going to invite him to a dinner, or he's going to have to work late, or something about his context will change. And now the answer that he gave me today, sitting in the seat in the Harvard Club, which was entirely true and authentic, is no longer true and authentic, not because he's lying to me, but because his context changes. And one of the important things about doing consumer research is not only understanding the desirability of an idea, but also understanding the context in which that idea needs to live, which is constantly changing.
And that's comes another thesis. Do not commit yourself with failure. Sometimes I am calling, people from VTEX call myself crazy. Because I change ideas. Say I decided like 15 days ago to go for that direction. And then I just flip for another direction. Say, oh, come on, but you convince us to go for that direction. That's another thing, guys. Do not have commitment with your failures. You can flip. The context changes every day. So don't commit to the success of your word. Oh, because I said that I'm going to have beef to David Schonthal in Harvard Club, and it's a hell of a house, and in front of 200 and 1.8 thousand people online, I'm sorry, Sabrina, my wife, say we need to have a beef and salad. No. I will adapt myself. Say, okay, forget about it. Yeah, I'm a liar. And if you have a journalist here say, oh, Mariano was a liar. He committed to have like a beef and salad. This is you say, look, I'm going to put a new web store live. This is you say, oh, I'm going to redo my e-commerce platform. This is you changing your ERP. This is you hiring a new CMO. This is the reality. When you commit with something, you tend to be attached to your success because your reputation relies on your word. And this is not good. If you do not embrace failure by, not on a romantic, again, if you talk about failure, every single, average university would talk about failure on a romantic way. Very few of them, one represented here, Kellogg, will approach for real. And embrace failure is giving a shit for your reputation.
Do you know some of the most famous companies that exist today started by accident because of a failure of the original idea?
Could you quote two of them?
Sure. How many of you have ever heard of a mobile application called Bourbon, B-R-B-N? Anybody? Yeah? One of you? So Bourbon, back in like the early, mid-2000s, was a application that's a little like Foursquare, where you download the app and you check in at locations around the area where you live, and you can post things and get people to come meet you. I'm not surprised to hear that none of you have heard of it because it was an epic disaster. It never actually got off the ground. Except in an attempt to try to make it more desirable, the founders of Bourbon kept experimenting with like little widgets and little additional features for their product, one of which was the ability to take a photo of the place you were checking in, and then they had a couple of really basic filters on it. So you could make the photo look more artistic, you could make it sepia or black and white. You guys see where this is going? So it turns out that people were downloading the Bourbon app not to check in at locations around California or New York. They were downloading it specifically to use the photo editing app. And now if the founders of Bourbon were dead set on having a social check-in site, they would have ignored the evidence that, like, the main idea is not working, but this really weird feature seems to be getting a lot of attention. And of course, they pivoted the whole business over to photo editing. And of course, it's the founding story of Instagram. And lots of really famous, hugely successful digital businesses and consumer businesses wound up being successful not because of the original idea, but because they paid attention to the data, which otherwise would have looked like a failure, but actually pointed the way towards opportunity.
Who likes Nutella here? And if 100% of you will not raise your hands because you're not paying attention on us. Nutella, right? Nutella, it is a war accident. If you go for the history of Nutella, Nutella was made because the cocoa cannot reach the war countries, and they put how do you say avelã in English? It's
hazelnut.
Yeah, hazelnut. So they mix with hazelnut because they didn't have cocoa, and that was like, oh, this is a creepy chocolate. That was Nutella being raised. Carrier invented the air conditioning. He was a doctor, not an engineer, mechanic engineering. He invented because it was an accident. The ice from Boston came to the New York. The transportation was broke, and he lost 1/3 of the hospital lives. And he said, "No, I will not depend on ice anymore." And he invented. And you have like several. And what are the accidents that you have right now inside your company? Probably the ones that the VPs and directors are afraid of. Take this in consideration. You are paying high salaries for the ones to be afraid of something that will be your company in the future.
Yes.
Okay, we could stay here for like one day talking about the fool and the friction. This is another concept from his book, and I was really impressed with the book because the book it is not only a business purpose book, shapes the way you think about how you can thrive by facing the human element. And this is a kind of interesting concept. The balance between the fool and the friction. Please explore.
So the metaphor we use in this book is fuel and friction. Fuel are all of the forces that move someone towards change. So again, the desirability of an idea, the appeal of a new strategy, the magnetism of a new offer. And frictions are the things that stand in the way of that change. And really there's this tension that exists between fuel and friction. And as we mentioned before, most marketers and innovators' instinct is that if we're at an impasse between fuel and friction, the answer is increase the fuel, right? Make it more desirable, price it differently, market it differently. And what we talk about in the book is, no, it's actually less expensive and far more effective to remove the friction that stands in the way, but we don't really have departments in our businesses focused on friction removal. We have advertising groups, we have marketing groups, we have sales groups, we have pricing, finance, but there aren't very many people in our companies whose job it is to go out into the world where people are experiencing these challenges or where they're trying to make progress and identify the sources of friction that stand in the way. But what I can promise you is removing the friction that stands in the way of the change they already want to make will be far more powerful, far more durable, and far more cost-effective than simply trying to throw new pricing or new advertising at it.
Yeah. Talking about the destruction, to talk about innovation. I was inquired by a CEO of a big brand, a global brand, last week. And one of his team, they have an initiative that's to build a new brand. And this new brand, it's started to become very powerful. And the CEO called me just to be advised, say, what should I do? Because the brand that we own is becoming too powerful. but we have the big brand of our company. So how to migrate the power of the new brand to the brand? And I say, are you kidding me? Why you are trying to kill the future? On the new brand, he has 50 people. In the giant brand, probably he has 5,000 people. And these 50 people are doing much more than the 5,000. And then I invite him to think, say, come to your board members and ask them. And the board members, the only rule of a board members, only role of a board member, it is to defend the long-term value of the stakeholders. That's why the board members exist. So I embrace him to say, go to your board members and bring them 2 scenarios. One, in 15 years, the new brand became like a 2-3 digits, 2 digits margin business with a high growth. And that's the company that they have. But do something for me. Do not mention this is with a new logo. Put this exercise, but put this exercise with your own brand in the new product. They're gonna unanimously approve. But at the end, in the last slide, you introduce them the project that they have approved as a new brand. And probably 70% of them will flip. Oh my God. You need to know if you have the right board members with you. And today, one of the main things that kind of block evolution, and that's a real fact that happened last week. And the CEO say, I don't have the courage. And I say, okay, so you should think about it. That's a real case of a huge company. So think about this. What can you really do to transform your company on this context of fuel and friction? Where are you will know who are the names that you can put in the friction side, who are the names that you can put in the fuel side. Don't mix them. It's not going to work. Allow the fuel to fly and to destroy what you have. But it's not natural for us to do that. Think about this. Okay, let's go for another topic. You are in NRF. NRF is the biggest retail show in the world. We are very glad that happened this year, despite all the energy. And I congrats Edu, Alberto, and all the BTR Varese delegation that made it happen. That means fear, right? Edu and Alberto spent probably the last 10 days in the phone from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. convincing you guys that it would be safe to be here. And now, just because the context changed and the curve in the United States, New York is like, boom. Now you feel, oh, I'm good. Remember the context, the truth, that can change reality. So at the end of the day, you came here and you went to a lot of speeches, and you could see like CEOs of IBM and whatever. But at the end of the day, the feeling is that probably, that's my opinion, it is among you guys is that knowledge is a little bit romantic. The question is not what, the question is how to execute. So my last topic here. It is, and then we're going to open for 1 or 2 questions. My last topic, it is, you're going to leave NRF with a lot of things in your head. And there is a kind of element that's the American Airlines or Latam Airlines. It is a eraser. Everything that you learn here, they erase during the flight. And you keep doing the same thing as you do it in the next day. And it's like living an avatar. You are in a metaverse here. So, what is...
I do feel like I'm in Hogwarts, though.
Yeah, you are. So, what is, in your opinion, David, these business owners, these executives here, what they can do in their mind kind of shaping process to avoid the inertia?
Yeah. That is a interesting and complicated question, so maybe I'll choose like one thing. Companies often make the mistake of assuming that the business they are in is the products that they sell. So if you ask somebody, what business are you in? I'm in a consumer packaged goods business, or I'm in a food business, or I'm in a retail business. That is the species of business you are. Like, that's where you show up in a market research report. But I would argue that the business you are in is the progress that you help people make. The progress that you help people make. So you're not necessarily in, like, this is sort of interesting. I worked for a company, consulting with a company that was a integrated diabetes management service. They help people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes manage their lives. And one of the ways they do this is by putting people into plans that help them control their blood sugar and HbA1c. And if you ask these executives, what business are you in? They would say, we're in the diabetes management business, or we're in the blood sugar control business. That is how. That is not what. That is how you help people make progress, but that is not the progress. If you ask their consumers what it is that this product does for them, what they will say is, this is going to enable me. Is remember that when you go home, try to recast the business you are into the progress you're helping your customers make. And when you do that, the ways in which you can help them become far more interesting. So going back to that furniture example, if you ask that company what business they were in before we did this research, they would say, we're in the custom furniture business. As it turns out, they're not in the custom furniture business. They are in the home upgrading business. They are in the interior upgrading business. And if you're in the interior upgrading business, taking somebody's existing furniture out is a logical thing to do, because if that is the service you're performing, clearly you want to do that. If you're in the furniture construction business, removing somebody's existing furniture doesn't even enter your mind, because that's not the business we're in. So I hope that you will find it empowering when you go home, if you haven't thought about it this way, to remember that the business you're in is the progress you're helping your customers make.
Thank you very much. My last message for you guys, it is around, as you said, David, we need to pick one message. I would pick the message that promote the talents inside your organization, or hire the ones that can see power in the OPEX world. Almost nothing anymore can be put in the balance sheet and to amortize. Only real estate. The rest is amortized in 1-2 years. Although US GAAP or IFRS or any accounting kind of protocol allows you to amortize in, it's okay? Okay, no, they were waving to me, and we are good. What?
Saying, you're doing great, keep going.
Yeah. I would take for that. That's my context. Everything today, if you're going to buy a new ERP, if you're going to buy a new whatever, at the end of the day, these will amortize in 1-2 years. If you allocate these because the accounting allows you to do more EBITDA this year, you're killing your ability to grow in the years to come. You are transferring the responsibility of action to the ones that will substitute you in 4 or 5 years. So if I leave you a message, promote the young talents that can deal and pursue power and reputation by dealing with OPEX scenarios. And an OPEX scenarios is a tough one, because it's the same to come to your company that deals with a $50, $100 million CapEx discussions between the VPs and say, this year, 0. Find your money. Then you are creating the right environment for transformation. And innovation, it is not a matter of doing what you do better. This is changing. Innovation is to transform yourself, to transform your company, and that means skew your business. So stay with that in your head. David Schonthal,
can I add one thing
yes,
to what
please.
you just said, which is kind of...
So you have plenty of time.
So I'm a professor at the Kellogg School of Management teaching MBA students, and one of the comments that my MBA students often make when they're leaving school is they're going to go into an industry that they know nothing about, or they're going to go into a company that they know nothing about, and isn't that a problem? Like, I don't know anything about retail, I don't know anything about consumer, I'm intimidated maybe that won't be valuable, and one of the things that we remind our students of is the fact that you don't know anything about that business is actually a huge advantage, because you can go in and question the status quo. Why do we do it this way? Why do we have OpEx structured this way? Why is it that we make these decisions? I'm sure some of you have heard of the term beginner's mind. When you're in a business long enough, you become institutionalized. You wind up sticking with the status quo. The younger people in your companies are the ones that if you give them permission will question everything. And usually in their questions, there's probably an answer like, you know, I don't know why we do it this way. Or maybe we shouldn't do it this way. So I love what you said about enabling and empowering younger employees.
Yeah, so before we close and thanking him to be with us, and actually I believe we are in front of one of the best authors of our time. He don't know that yet, but he will know in the next year. So, and it's going to be very hard and expensive to bring him back. So let's explore him a lot now. Questions, guys. We do have a time for 1 or 2 questions. Please don't be shy. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, David. I'm Franklin. I'm an anthropologist. I work with consumer behavior. So I'd like to hear from you about like the how to combine big data and thick data. We tell a lot about the human element, but sometimes we look at people as only cold data. So I'd like to hear from
that is an awesome question. And by the way, all of you should have an anthropologist on staff. I'm not joking. I'm serious.
I fully agree.
These are people whose skill set and job it is to understand people. And if you are in a business that serves people, having someone with an anthropological mind is really important. This question is really interesting because it comes up a lot in school. Well, what about big data? Well, I'm talking a lot about small data, right? Like I'm talking about going out and interviewing 10 customers qualitatively in context, observing them in their natural habitat. But there's so much attention paid to big data and analytics. I guess the answer I will say is data can usually tell you where there is an opportunity, but data will almost never tell you why. Data will almost never tell you why. It can point to the fact that there's a growing market over here, but why is when you actually have an anthropological mind and you go out and you're in the field and you observe not just what people do, but understand why they do it. And the reasons people do things is never at the surface. It's always 4 or 5 levels of why deeper than that. So spending hours observing your customers, but also asking them about the why behind the what is essential to making smart decisions.
I have a privilege to interview Andreas Weiging, that was the chief data officer of Amazon. It was 6 years ago. And something that he told me was quite impressive. And he said, look, Mariano, how many people do you believe we do have in our data department or our CRM department? And I say, I don't know, 500. And he said, 42. I said, 42? I said, wow, you are Amazon. You are like, wow. And I say, but now ask me how many people I do have in my question department. I say, what's a question department? And he told me, to deal with data? This is not a big deal. To deal with questions, that's the big deal. I have 270 people in my question department. I say, oh, that's maybe the answer of your question is through this. It is all about the why, the question behind the data. So don't hire data only. Hire the ones who knows what questions should be made. Okay, last message. We have 52 seconds. How to put you in a vulnerable position. And I'm going to pass to Dave to the last sentence. But I have one suggestion. I am also an academic director of ACON. It is an institute inside Churchill College in Cambridge University. And we were working to find out how to bring something tangible that would put high executives and business owners in a vulnerable position. Because that's how the human element would be changed. And we pop up with something that we launched 2 years ago and now is available to all the world. It's called the CMX exam. That's the CFA for the digital commerce world. So we partner with some institutions around the world and we launched these globally. It calls the CMX exam, powered by Acon. And there's 3 levels. Level 1, level 2, level 3. And the level 3 is the title exam. On the level 3, we run for 1,000 people, last edition, and there was only 2.5 approval. And that's a representation. The questions are exactly what we do believe a digital commerce manager should know. And we invited 1,000 of them to do it, and only 2.4 get through. So I'm inviting you guys, go now to the CMX exam website, put yourself vulnerable as a CEO, chairman, whatever. Put yourself vulnerable, because then you will embrace changes. That's my last message. David?
Yes, do that. And just, I guess, just to underscore, growth begins at the edge of your comfort zone. And if you're not finding ways to make yourself uncomfortable and experience a little bit of vulnerability, you're probably not growing either as a leader or as an organization. So I couldn't agree more.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David Schonthal.